Hi, welcome to our project presentation. My name is Brianna.
I'm Jenna.
I'm Jamie.
Hi, I'm Lauren.
I'm Laura.
Oh, darn it. Our original study was decreasing bouts of prolonged sitting among office workers by Green, Sigurdsson, and Wilder. It focused on long bouts of sedentary activity, which increase health risks such as obesity, premature death, and cardiovascular disease. In efforts to decrease the health risk, researchers suggest standing more and taking walk breaks. 3 behavioral interventions were used throughout this study, including information recording where no other interaction was provided, tactile prompts with vibration of a device called an actigraph every 30 minutes, and treatment package, which included tactile prompts, feedback. The treatment package showed to work best to decrease the sedentary activity. The supporting literature found that Shames and colleagues used the Fitbit, which was most popular activity tracker on the market. Online data or providing online data and quick access to the progress shown. The Fitbit also provides challenges in which people can compete against friends and family and with the Fitbit, creating a large environment of peer support. It provides prompt feedback and results through the application, which promotes self-motivation. However, the Fitbit does not measure activity energy expenditure or the activities per minute, but measures total energy expenditure, showing how much activity happens within the entire duration of the activity. The Fitbit over and undercounts activity levels depending on the type of activity. The study also showed that active minutes are lower on the Fitbit because the Fitbit counts in bouts of 10 minutes, whereas the actigraph counts every minute by the intensity and duration of the activity. Another study that we found was Perry and colleagues. The purpose of this study was to decrease inactive minutes within the work setting. 3 interventions were used, including active workstation, which consisted of standing and exercising between tasks, the use of walking and talking meetings, and taking longer routes to get to destinations within the workplace. Intervention B was physical activity, which promoted walking to the destination instead of taking a bus, walking during breaks, and increasing stair usage. The last intervention was ergonomics, which included taking active breaks and using a piano stool with an air cushion to promote movement during sedentary periods. In this study, intervention A was proven to be the most effective method to decrease sedentary time at work. However, all the methods used decrease the percentage of sedentary time and increase light intensity activity.
Continuing on with the supporting literature, in an article entitled Step Detection and Activity Recognition Accuracy of 7 Physical Activity Monitors, it discussed the comparison of 7 different activity monitors, and the results of the study showed that the Fitbit was one of the best performing in step count recognition. Another article that we found compared the wearable fitness devices, and it discussed information for health and fitness, how it motivates movements, and how it benefits in reaching goals. It can help motivate people to exercise more throughout the day and more for a healthier lifestyle. Wearing the device will also help with reaching goals by keeping track of the steps, the miles, the calorie intake, etc. This article also discussed that the fitness apps are available for download through online stores for free of charge, and it's easy to connect with the device to keep track of fitness. Also, we found that light activity is beneficial for sedentary time in offices. Another article that we found was the contribution of office work to sedentary behavior associated risks. It discussed the poor health and mortality associated with sedentary time, particularly in an office setting. This article concluded that office work does contribute significantly to sedentary exposure. It also concluded that workplaces such as these should provide opportunities for people to participate in light intensive activity.
The purpose of our project was to decrease sedentary activity bouts, focusing on a work week of Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, to decrease the health risk associated with sedentary activity, including cardiovascular disease, obesity, premature death, and increase the activity per day to 30 minutes.
Participants in our project included 5 female participants between the ages of 23 and 30. Our geographic locations varied with 5 different states represented, including Virginia, Ohio, Indiana, Georgia, and Maryland. Additionally, our occupations also differed. We had a registered behavior technician, an early childhood intervention specialist, a paraprofessional, a behavioral treatment services director, and a payroll clerk. It appeared that these specific occupations impacted our results, which we'll touch on later in our limitations and conclusions. The setting of our project was took place at each of our places of employment. As mentioned before, the hours that were tracked between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. during the day at Monday through Friday. The settings, like our occupations, varied between participants. 2 of the participants worked at elementary schools, 2 worked at ABA agencies, and 1 worked at a standard 8 to 5 office. As with our occupations, the setting also seemed to impact our scores, which we'll discuss later in this presentation.
The materials used were a Fitbit, which was worn on the wrist to track active minutes, an Excel chart, which recorded our data in and graphed the data, Google Documents, which allowed us to share documents between other participants. Google Hangouts allowed us to meet with the other participants to ensure reliability and validity. And a phone with the Fitbit application, which syncs with the Fitbit to document and record data and active minutes being collected throughout the project.
The behavior that we're targeting in this study is sedentary movement or activity. Sedentary activity was defined by the original study as any activities that do not increase energy expenditure substantially above the resting level, such as sitting. In order to collect our data on sedentary activity, all participants wore a device called a Fitbit, which tracked the number of active minutes throughout the day. Participants recorded their active minutes on an Excel spreadsheet that was shared in Google Docs. The spreadsheet consisted of names of participants and Monday through Friday total bouts. And total bouts were defined as a period of activity, more specifically to the study walking, And at the end of each workday, the participants recorded their active minutes in the spreadsheet.
For our baseline phase, all 5 of our group members wore a Fitbit to track their daily activity prior to starting any intervention. We wore the Fitbit for a total of 9 hours per day, and any data collected outside of that 8 to 5 parameters were considered not part of our actual data, therefore were discarded. Our initial baseline for all participants was collected for a total of 1 week, a Monday through Friday with 5 consecutive work days. During this time, we completed our daily activities without any sort of attempt to increase our physical activity. So we went about our day-to-day schedules as usual. At 5 p.m. daily, we would sync our Fitbits with our phone application, and that would bring up our data on that application. We were then able to take the activity minutes recorded on there and log it into a Google document that was shared with all other group members.
For intervention, each participant had their Fitbit set to receive a prompt hourly that told them to move and be active. The prompt started at 8 o'clock a.m. every day during the intervention phase and continue on throughout the day until 5 o'clock p.m. Monday through Friday. Each participant had their Fitbit application downloaded to their phone that connected to each person's device. This app tracked the activity minutes for each person, and the purpose of the intervention phase was to see if the prompt of being told to move per hour showed an increase in active minutes versus not receiving a prompt in the baseline phase.
To record inter-observer agreement, we collected screenshots from the Fitbit app, either from the computer or the phone dashboard, that was uploaded to a Google Doc. We had several different folders for these things for IOA and treatment fidelity, which I'll talk about next. The picture included the active minutes for that day, and the screenshots needed to occur before 5 p.m. to ensure any additional activity points acquired by the group members were not included in the study. Several of our participants regularly participated in activity that would have given them more activity minutes after 5 o'clock. Several people participated in exercise classes and went on runs and things like that. So we had to make sure that any activity points that were given from those activities after 5 p.m. weren't included into the study. IOA was done for 50% of the days that the Fitbit was being worn for each phase. Each member of the group had the opportunity to verify the data that was being uploaded by every group member. This ensured that each member was calculating and measuring what we said we were measuring. We wanted to make sure that if we had a really active weekend on Saturday, accountable and not using those active minutes for our data because it fell outside of the original parameters that we had stated. These are a few examples of the IOA that we collected, some of the screenshots that were taken. If you notice, the one on the left was done during a baseline phase. There was no active minutes recorded, and you can see the date and the active minutes. And then the next one would be from an intervention phase, where you will also see the date and the active minutes, so then you know that it's within the Monday through Friday. But not every one of the screenshots ended up showing the time of day to make sure that we had our screenshots done by 5 o'clock. For treatment fidelity, each member of the group uploaded a screenshot of the home screen. For this, we weren't necessarily worried about the activity minutes on it. We just wanted to verify that their Fitbit was working and charged and being used for the days that we said that it was being done for. We needed it to include the date. to make sure it fell within the Monday through Friday, and these screenshots were uploaded for 25% of each phase. These are just a few more examples of some of the pictures that were allowed for treatment fidelity. Sometimes Fitbit, depending on which screen you're clicking on, whether it's the dashboard or the actual activity part, but the dates are listed to know that the active minutes were recorded on those days, and that allowed us to verify that the data that was being uploaded in the graph was done on the correct days.
Okay, so these are my results in my graph of the active minutes. My data turned out to be stable for the most part. I was able to complete 2 weeks of baseline and 2 weeks of intervention. And comparing the baseline to intervention, I will say that I had an increase in active minutes. So currently working in a standard Monday through Friday office, 8 to 5, I've noticed a lot of sedentary activity within myself and with others. So when I get busy doing work on the computer, it could be an hour or two before I actually move. So the intervention proved to work for me because once I actually received the alert, I was able to start moving and be active for a period of time and get a break from sitting. So during the baseline phase, I don't think I received as many active minutes because there were times where I would be steadily working, forget to move early.
This is my graph. Because of spring break, I was unable to complete my graph, so I only have a baseline and DR intervention phase. My intervention phase, I could not move out of it because I did not feel like it was stable enough. My intervention did not show to be very effective because the average was a lot lower than my baseline phase. But I found as a teacher's assistant in kindergarten, my data was influenced greatly by tasks being completed at work, such as recess duty, when it was inside versus outside recess. When it was outside, I was able to move more and wasn't so confined. One of the days I was on a field trip, which required a lot of walking. But other than those days, I do a lot of students to where I'm sitting down and can't get away when I got the alerts, or working one-on-one with students and could not just walk away. So some things that I did to increase activity as much as I could was to incorporate things such as skipping, jumping jacks, or running in place when counting and working on counting skills with my students, or walking the longer route to wherever I was trying to get into the school.
This is my graph. I was able to complete 1 week of baseline, 2 weeks of intervention, and then a final week of baseline. Currently, I work as a registered behavior technician at a small ABA clinic. I work one-on-one with clients throughout the day. I do a lot of work sitting down, playing and teaching in the natural environment, DTT at the table. So my day-to-day activities heavily influenced my data as shown in my graph. The average baseline one was, was 0 minutes. The average for my second baseline was 0 minutes. And the average for my intervention phase was 5.4 minutes. During the intervention phase, I found it pretty hard to stay active enough to receive minutes. I see clients back to back and don't really receive a break during the day. So I found it hard to implement the interventions that we've discussed in previous slides. On the days that I did receive active minutes, I was actually covering for a coworker at an elementary school. And in that time, I was able to run around with the kids during recess. But overall, I found that there were many limitations that I had encountered with regard to the device I was wearing, as well as where I work, which inevitably influenced my data.
So this is my graph. I was able to stay in baseline for my initial baseline for just a week's time as we had established. My initial baseline only included 4 days because I had 1 day off during our baseline phase. So since I wasn't in my work setting during that time, we had to disregard the data for that day. My initial baseline average was 6 minutes, and then I transitioned to 2 weeks of intervention data collection. I did see an increase in my average. I was able to average about 33.47 minutes during my intervention phase. This did meet the parameters and the goal that we had set, but my data was still very inconsistent. There were some days where I had a lot of activity and other days where I was still limited, even with the interventions being in place. I found that with my job as a director of a program, I sit in a lot of meetings and presentations, supervisions, meetings that I can't really get up and leave to perform any sort of physical activity. So even when I got the prompt and I knew that I should go do something active, I was unable to leave those meetings at that time. So for me, it had a lot to do with my scheduling for the day, whether I was actually able to increase my active minutes.
This is my graph. I was able to complete an initial baseline, a phase of intervention, and then go back to baseline. I was initially very shocked at my baseline data. I'm an early childhood intervention specialist, and I work full-time in an integrated preschool. And 50% of my students have a special need of some sort. I have several kiddos that like to leave as much as they can, so I am moving quite often. So I was surprised that my Fitbit didn't pick up on those things and consider that movement activity for the initial baseline. When I did move into intervention, as you can see on my graph, my data average did increase to 11.5 minutes. And then when I went back to baseline, my average minutes actually increased to 19. I found this to be kind of interesting for me because the intervention phase, even though my data did increase, I didn't find it was a result of the prompting. I found that it was more as a result of activities that I had planned with my students. So as our intervention continued, the weather got nicer, we were getting our kids outside, we began doing more things gross motor movement wise. So I found it had to do more with my scheduling across the board than it did the actual intervention. Like a couple of my group members have mentioned, just because I got the prompt, whatever I was doing, it didn't necessarily mean I could get up and start moving. Sometimes I was able to, sometimes it was a great opportunity for my students to take a break and do 15 jumping jacks and practice holding our Superman pose, but most of the time I was sitting at a table with a kiddo doing hand over hand, or sometimes I was even sitting in a meeting when I got the prompt. So I didn't really find that the intervention was necessarily successful for me in providing more awareness to my lack of activity. But even though my data on a graph kind of would say otherwise.
So this is a picture of all of our results put together in a multiple baseline graph. If you look at all the participants' graphs together, the baseline average was 6.808 minutes. and the intervention average is 15.27 minutes. Due to the limitations that we are going to discuss on the next slide, participants had to move through the phases at different times.
As a group, we felt like we ran into more external factors and limitations than I think we had initially anticipated. One of the most obvious limitations for us is that not every member has a job that is in the 8 to 5 range. We went with that time frame because that's what the maximum was for one of our group members. But for example, my job, I work 8:15 to 3:30. Brianna works 8 to 2. Some of our other members, their hours fluctuate. Some of them work evenings. So we settled on an 8 to 5 because it's a typical workday, but really it's not a true representation of our workdays, even though it's a typical workday. Some members of this group encountered snow days, sick days, and spring break. This impacted our ability to include the data from these days in our study. So even though we might have been active on snow days, or probably not on a sick day, or on spring break, because we had outlined it in our protocol to only be included on days where we were actually working, we had to omit this data from our study. Some members, because of this, some members were only able to complete 2 phases. Like Brianna had mentioned, her spring break hit at a time that she would have typically gone back to baseline if her data had been stable, but this wasn't possible because of the timing. We also kind of had to fit our time into what the project requirement timelines had allotted for us. Some of us would have probably been able to carry it on longer. I would have probably been able to go back to another phase of baseline if we would have had more time to complete the project, but because of those limitations, we weren't. Some of us ran into some device issues, either not accurately recording the steps and activity, or there were times that the devices had to be charged and we couldn't, excuse me, we couldn't count that data, obviously, if we weren't wearing the Fitbit. And we didn't all have the same Fitbit, which could have made a difference. Some of us had the visible watch ones, some of us had the clips, and some of us had the ones where you couldn't see the screen unless you uploaded your data. So for some, it was motivating to see how many steps, but some people didn't have that option. So that was also a limitation that we ran into. One of the limitations that I personally ran into was because I left work at 3:30, I didn't always remember to check my data at 5 o'clock. By the time I got home and was cooking dinner for my family, there were days where I may have actually acquired more active minutes than I should have, and there really is no way on Fitbit to know. You know, even if you look at the graph, it doesn't give you specific times of when you completed the activity. So it would have been very easy to skew our data a couple minutes either way. So those were the limitations that we ran into. And like I said, we really didn't anticipate some of these things going into the study. We encountered completely different limitations than were listed in the original study.
Okay, so we concluded that external factors played a major part in the individual data. Some members had breaks/vacations from work. Data also fluctuated significantly due to different limitations. Each person's data was different. Everyone lives in different areas. So while I was able to do 2 weeks of baseline, 2 weeks of intervention, others were not able to do so due to issues in their surrounding environment. The prompts for movement did not increase physical activity for some. While the prompt during intervention phase was to tell each participant to move per hour, it was not feasible to do so all the time. For example, one time during the intervention phase, it prompted me to move. However, I was in a meeting and unable to do so. So this contributed to the activity movement, being fluctuated. Also, more movement was associated with scheduled activities. Some participants received more active minutes during specific activities where there would be a lot of movement. For example, participants that worked in a school setting may have received more active minutes during recess time when there was more activity going on. Also, more influences played a role in data collection than expected. This could be attributed to environmental factors. And also, even though we saw an increase in the average during the intervention phase, functional relationship exists between the tactile prompts and the active minutes. Next, we'll have our reference slide.
Even though we saw an increase in the average during the intervention phase, we cannot conclude that the functional relationship exists between the tactile prompts and the active minutes. This concludes our presentation. Thank you for watching.